have JESS GOSLING, an UK civil servant, award-winning entrepreneur, public speaker, international strategy, culture, leadership consultant, and a lot more. She was recently named the 27th in the top 100 women future leaders 2020 via Yahoo Finance and Involve. She was also named the most influential women in tech in 2020 by Computer Weekly and one of the Pitch 100 SuperWoman 2020. She has consistently strived to bridge the gap between culture, diplomacy, and innovation, and spent over 7 years abroad in deployments with the UN, NGOs, civil society, startups, and beyond. She built her career on interdisciplinary thinking and adding value from a cross-sectorial approach. In this conversation, she talks a lot about living with unseen disabilities, founding the professional network Growth and Grace Collective, hyping people up, how to work across different sectors and still make sense of your career, and a lot more. Besides all of that, over the pandemic, she began to create a bi-weekly segment titled Culture, Diplomacy, and Innovation in LinkedIn with over 9,000 readers in just 10 weeks. She also started an offshoot of this project called Showcase to champion more intersectional voices around the world, and she even championed us from Lilac Networking. Jess, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for having me, not us. I don't have multiple personalities.
But yeah, so basically we always start this by asking someone, what has been the worst work experience ever?
Yeah, so this would probably be part of a job. I was a new hire kind of getting out from one bad situation and ended up being in another bad situation. It was a good pay rise, which was great, but the stress level that came with it, because there was a lot of uncertainty of the future of that organization. And I hadn't had the experience of like change management before. And I just kind of being diagnosed with dyslexia, and my anxiety was, you really want to make an effort, you want to make a good impression, and all of the things that I previously used in my arsenal of, being proactive, making an effort, showing up, all of these course things that are really important to me, and there's something that I do from the moment I wake up, that I guess that passion and drive to meet people wasn't seen so favorably. And I ended up in a situation where I kind of had to fight my personality, which is never good. And I only stayed there for 6 weeks before I got this job, which I love. And
that's good. I'm glad you got out of it quickly. So before we had to talk about what you do now with Growth and Grace Collective and everything else, I know you've had a really extensive career, and you studied Korean and history of art before going on to get your master's and now your PhD, right? So if you could just tell us what you were thinking at the time, if you can remember, when you decided to study that, and what were your goals at the time for your career?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have to think way back now. Yeah, so I majored in Korean and history of art and archaeology with an elective in international politics, SOAS, University of London. I then did my master's there in conflict rights and justice, focusing on international law and ethnic conflict. The years between those are about 3 years. I graduated from SOAS from my BA in 2012, and I graduated from my master's in 2015. The initial inspiration to do Korean was really, I kind of went down the options of SOAS's language offer in East Asia, because I knew I originally went into SOAS studying just art history, and there was an option to do an elective in a language, and I was very interested in East Asian art. So I signed myself up to do Korean, because I had studied Japanese for about 2.5 years before that, because my best friend during high school, and still is my best friend, is half Japanese. So whenever we went to her house, it was very much, Studio Ghibli movies with English subs. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. And I did 6 months of Chinese before starting SOAS, and I didn't respond to it as well as I had with the Japanese. I think it was the tonality of the language. And then I got to SOAS and thought, okay, I've done Japanese for 2.5 years. Let's try something different. There was the option of doing Cantonese, Mandarin Chinese, Hakka, which is another dialect. And I thought, oh, Korean sounds interesting. I'd started teaching myself how to read already because I was just curious. And then I ended up by the second month spending way more time on Korean than my actual than my actual degree. And my teacher asked if I wanted to join the program, and then I did. And then 6 months later, I was shifted off to Seoul because it was a combined program. And I didn't really think about it, to be honest. I don't think anyone really does, unless you're very forward thinking. All I knew is that I wanted to get to East Asia as soon as possible. I didn't want to do it as an English teacher. I'm a qualified English teacher. I qualified with, I did a CELTA via Cambridge. And I knew I didn't want to kind of do that route. I wanted to kind of do the more cultural international relations route. The international relations kind of focus that I have came a lot later in my degree, I'd say in my third year, after starting all of my electives in international politics. The way I saw doing a degree in Korean is that it was an investment. I was trying to reverse engineer how desirable I could be. I mean, at that point, I didn't know I was going to be in the job I am in now, or growth and grace. I mean, none of that was even on the radar. But I think when you're, 18, 19, 20, you could easily feel overwhelmed by all of the stuff that's around you. You know, all of these different people saying you should do this, you should do that. It would be really cool to do. Sometimes societal pressures also potentially can give you the false impression that the route that everyone takes is the best way for you too. And by that, I mean, the traditional kind of doctor, lawyer, engineer route. No, I never, I never fitted into any of those things, even though I had an interest in those fields. And I definitely, for a long time, actually, before I almost never went to university. And this is something that you don't know about me. I almost ended up at the Slade School of Art a lifetime ago, because I ended up I won a bursary kind of program at the Royal Academy of Art when I was about 16, and I was at the Prince's Drawing School for a time. I mean, these things you wouldn't know because they're not on my profile, and I keep those kind of a lot quieter. But it just goes to show that you don't have to follow the traditional kind of modes of education or modes of interest. If you have a passion about something or regarding something and you're good at it, go with it, follow your gut, I would say. And there's a wider, I guess, argument there of, you never know where life can take you. So being open to change, I mean, I had not expected to be asked to do Korean as a joint program. I wouldn't have asked, I wouldn't have thought that was an option myself until someone suggested it. And then I did it. And it was the best thing I ever did. And that changed my whole career trajectory to be like, okay, I'm a linguist now. Because I was told at a very young age that I couldn't learn. In the English education system, traditionally, you often get French as your second language. Now, I'm from a mixed family, and my younger brother is half French, and my French is appalling. I can read a book, but that's about it. 10 years of a French education, but I didn't like being forced to do something that I didn't want to do. So at GCSE level, which you're about 13, 14, I had asked if I could do Spanish, and they said, "Oh no, you can't because your French isn't high enough." And I was like, well, why would you dismiss my interest in a subject purely because I'm not doing your mandatory French qualification? And that really definitely kind of was something that I carried for a long time, and it was definitely a marker of my journey of being told I can't do stuff and then being really stubborn and deciding to do it. So that's where I ended up studying Japanese, and probably one of the reasons why I ended up majoring in Korean, because I wanted to show that kind of narrative that just because I have dyslexia and I have ADHD and I have anxiety doesn't mean I can't learn another language to such a proficient level that I actually have a degree in it.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And then you went on and you've lived in lots of different places.
I was going to ask if that was your next question.
Yes, I want to know about that, because I actually graduated in international relations, but I really never used it. I didn't go to university that much. I gotta say, I wasn't the best student. I thought I was gonna be the president, but that fell through very fast. And so I kind of never really pursued that path of international relations. And I think you did a lot of that, like really did. Still do, obviously, but you do lots of other things. I would like to know, like, how was the path? Like, how was the journey afterwards? Did you know what to do? Like, how did you go from one place to another? And
Oh God, this is a very good question. There was no plan. It was just what I fancied. So for context, for anyone who hasn't seen my 10 years of cross-sectorial experience, I've spent 7 years abroad in the past 11 years. I've done 2 United Nations deployments. I've been in NGOs, civil society, startups in the Middle East, in the Balkans, and the Caucasus, and East Asia, also Central America now. My husband's Costa Rican, so I guess I've now kind of refocused over there. It was definitely something that I'd never planned on it. I spent a lot of my time during my undergrad in Seoul. So I ended up spending about 3.5 years, over 3 years in Seoul itself, in South Korea, via teaching, working because of my undergrad. And then I ended up expanding my experience in East Asia. As I said, my best friend is half Japanese, so she actually now has a radio show in Niigata in Japan, which I can share the link of. She's awesome. It's all in Japanese, but she's really good. She also has a band, which is really cool. So kind of,
That's amazing.
I know. Yeah. How many people can say their best friend is a pop star in Japan? Though maybe I'm probably egging her on a bit, and making it seem a lot bigger, but she's doing fabulous, and it's great to see people in the creative industries doing so well, considering also the hardship that everyone's facing at the moment. So yeah, I did a lot of stuff in like China, Southeast Asia, Japan especially because of those kind of family friend ties, and obviously South Korea was my base for a long time. And then I ended up coming back to London because I was born and bred in London, and so my mum is still here, and so is my father, and came back for 6 months, worked for an NGO focused on the Middle East. That's when I got really interested in the Middle Eastern kind of international affairs sphere, especially the Israeli and Palestinian situation. And then I ended up going on my first United Nations deployment in the West Bank, which was the best thing I ever did. It was amazing. Very hard. I'm not saying it was easier by any means, but I'm so humbled to have had that experience because it opened up my eyes to a lot of things that I wasn't necessarily aware of, because that was my first kind of in the field experience. And then I ended up doing my master's part-time back at SOAS. So I came back to London after 5 months of being in the West Bank. And then every summer I was based in Pristina in Kosovo, and then I was based in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, focusing on kind of like ethnic conflict in the post-Yugoslavic kind of context, looking at how societies are made and also how they're broken up in times of conflict. And then I ended up going back and being a sexual violence research assistant for an NGO in Bosnia. Straight after that, I moved on to my second UN deployment. I was working for the United Nations Development Project in Tbilisi in Georgia. Yeah, and that was my last kind of big kind of thing that I did before kind of ending up in UK government, really.
What do you do if you're deployed somewhere with the UN? What were your roles? Yeah.
I mean, I was in the Governance Reform Fund, so I was a project support officer. So I was helping, I was doing research on public administration reform, gender issues, monitoring and evaluation of processes, and did a lot of supporting of $1 million proposals with donors. That was something that was really quite it was quite inspiring to see kind of how far reaching and how much of an impact these projects can have on people on the ground. Because quite often, if you look on the internet and you see a project, you won't necessarily see the actual real world kind of application or impact. And I was very humbled to kind of see that side of things.
Did you find it easy to move from one position to another? Did you have people to support you throughout this? Do you have any sort of colleagues that were helping you, or anyone? And how did you find your path?
I mean, my family are quite international, especially my dad's side, where we're all over because we're mixed. On my mum's side, my uncle actually works at Harvard. My one claim to fame. So in terms of like setting up and starting afresh, my family have done it, but not in the way that I've kind of baptismified it, if that makes sense. There was no rule book. There is no right or wrong way of doing things. Once you do it first, the first time is always the hardest, and then it kind of gets easier. So the first time, I moved to Seoul when I was just turned 19. I moved to a place that people didn't really speak English. I mean, some people did, but it was very much based on I was there to learn Korean. And I would probably say I was lower intermediate at the time. Yes, I had support from the university, but it was definitely one of those things where if you have informal networks, those kind of set you up. So I actually have very good friends from that time who I'm still very good friends with now. And, whenever I'm in New York, if they're in New York, we'll meet up when we were allowed to travel, obviously. And when, they're in London, they come and stay with me and my husband and vice versa. And those are the two that have really kind of also echoed my weird and random and wonderful international career. One of them is in Sudan. I am not sure. She always moves somewhere fun, doing a lot of kind of, I guess, wash and development work with communities that need it most. And the other one is a lawyer, the twins. Hi, Ivy and Willow, by the way. Hi, Ivy. Just naming dropping you. You guys are amazing. For me, it's always been those informal networks that helped me with my career. Yes, there are formal things in place that obviously, everywhere has them, but I find having, I guess, informal networks or friends who are international by nature. And so I've got friends everywhere, really, and I'm very humbled to call them friends. And I know that if I'm ever close to them geographically, I will go and see them, and I'll make an effort to. Vice versa. Obviously, London is a great transit hub for most places. So I'm also very privileged to say that I often end up being the overnight stay, which is great. I get snacks from all over the world. It's brilliant. So this is the best thing. That's the best thing. Snacks. Anyone wants to stay at my house, bring me snacks. I'm happy. Bottle of wine also help. But yeah, no, I think it's those informal networks that really make a difference. As I said, there's no right or wrong way of doing things, but the friends that I made when I first started on this journey of international work, or whatever you want to call it, have really they helped me to cement the skills that I have now and the values that I also hold very dear in terms of being open, being collaborative, using your intuition, being innovative, these things. And I think if you have those skills and if you have those values in place, then you're going to be fine if you do an international placement. And also seeking people who are like-minded in mindset also helps.
And I think it's interesting because you have so many interests and you had really a diverse career. You didn't stay in one place necessarily for too long if that didn't fit you. But then you went on to co-found the Growth and Grace Collective last year, which is a global network. And I wanted to know more about how that came about and where did the interest to do it. And it's pretty incredible because in the first year you did so many things. I think you did over 70 events. You have a massive audience. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's how I found out about you, first of all.
Oh, did you?
Yes.
Funny old world, isn't it? Yeah. So,
yes.
So just to give you some background, so I've done 6 career changes before we get into G&G. Just maybe because how G&G is founded is definitely reflected on how I've had a career, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've had 6 career changes, you name it. I've done it. I currently work in the UK government on matters of cultural diplomacy and international affairs. What I've always been interested in is the transmission of ideas and how we can really come together under different lenses. So whether it's diplomacy, whether it's creative industries, whatever it is, I'm interested in how we come together, basically. And I start my PhD in the field of interdisciplinary thinking. So this is further cementing my interest in how we come together. So G&G is an extension of that, I would say. So the Growth and Grace Collective, or as we call it, G&G, because it's easier to than forgetting the other part of the name, because I know it can be hard to remember the full name. It's a professional network seeking to change the narrative of upskilling, learning, and development. We started a year ago as of last August, and I had the initial idea probably a couple of months beforehand. I'd set up a creative agency, as one does, thought, oh, I'll give this a stab. I haven't done this before. And then, I do think about things, but I often kind of sign myself up to stuff and then slowly realize that maybe it's not the idea in my head. So I set up this creative agency and thought, oh, this will be really cool. I really want to bring people together. It definitely felt very jumbled and very higgledy-piggledy is the best way I would describe it. Very confusing. And then we had lots of different events that I did. And there was one that was called Growth and Grace, and it was networking for women. And that, out of anything that I did, literally blew up in my face. It was so popular. The first one I did, I had like 30 sign-ups overnight. It was incredible. And I was like, well, I'm going to pivot to the thing that's actually working. And so I dissolved that creative agency and then met my co-founder over Bumble Biz.
No way.
Yeah. Not many people, not many co-founders can say that. And then we met at a networking event, and too many cocktails later, G&G was born. My co-founder is Michaela Rice, she's in the creative industries. And kind of we founded G&G to focus on both equipping and empowering professionals in all sectors to grow themselves, both professionally and personally, in a holistic environment. So we took the best things out of public affairs, so transparency, accountability, visibility, all of these things, and then kind of merged that with the sheer amount of diversity that comes in the creative industries and other sectors to really have this really strong platform and core value set that ensured that, from a perspective of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, that everyone felt safe. And we actually went gender neutral last January, though we very much focus on female issues, like the gender pay gap. But we do believe that all of the issues that we face is not gender specific, like imposter syndrome. So we are still very focused on the female issues, so gender pay gap and all of these things. But we wanted to also make it really inclusive from the onset. So that's why we ended up becoming gender neutral, which I was very happy to announce last January.
You do all these online events. You do a lot of work on upskilling. And what do you, sorry, I want to know more about you in an aspect, because you had all these careers, you have a lot of interests, and you still managed to appear as one in a world that everyone tells you that you need to have a niche and you need to market yourself as a specialist in something. I feel like you are a specialist in many things, but is this something that was important to you when you with G&G? Is this something that was ever a struggle for you to tell people what you were about, especially when you were changing careers? Or did it come natural to you?
What do you mean, in terms of events, or?
Yeah, just like how you position yourself as a professional, having all those interests. Yes.
I think that is my niche, that I am interested in so many things. I flex to a lot of different things, whether it's, startups, international politics, creative industries, tech, digital. I have interest in all of these things. And I think, yes, I agree with the term niche, and I do agree with for a lot of people, when you talk about personal branding, and I teach personal branding and LinkedIn optimization myself, but especially from the perspective of being a multi-hyphenate. Now, I don't know how much you know about this term, but it's one that I have adopted that as my niche. My niche is that I can flex to a lot of things at a very quick pace because I'm interested in them. So, for example, some of my core values would be I am an international connector. I seek to connect people. I seek to add value. I seek to, if it's something that I find interesting, I'll learn more about it. I think it depends on how you want to market yourself. I mean, with the G&G perspective, it was an asset because it meant that in any industry, I could kind of either have a conversation or I knew someone who knew someone, you know what I mean? So it was a good thing. I think one of the challenges that I've had, and this is maybe this is a wider issue that people who have some similar issues or similar realities will probably resonate with this. So I have 3 unseen disabilities. I have ADHD, dyslexia, and anxiety. And I think trying to eloquently disclose that and, and communicate that kind of that narrative in a positive way can be quite difficult for a lot of people. I know I've always wore it as a badge of honor, because I think, dyslexia and the way that I see the world and the way that I kind of see going forward for me, that is my niche, that's my superpower. But it can be really difficult to navigate those conversations. So I think personally, one of the biggest difficulties that I've had is kind of also showing that, not that I want to be a poster child for people who have disabilities, I'm not saying that at all, but I wanted to be able to showcase that anyone, even if you have a neurological disorder, and I've got 3 of them, you can do amazing things. And I think that was one of the hardest things for me because, I didn't necessarily say the 3 disorders that I have, or I never even, and sometimes I didn't even bring up that subject because I didn't think it was relevant. Not that I want praise or anything for it, but I think it's really important to have these open conversations because it makes people realize that, okay, someone who I thought didn't have a disability has 3 unseen ones. That's quite thought-provoking because,
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other things that I often get, and this is both professionally and personally, is that when I say, oh, I've got 3 unseen disabilities, I've got this, this, and this, and that's just how I am. Love me or hate me, I'm like Marmite, right? That's it. That is literally my phrase. Love me or hate me, I'm like Marmite. Hopefully don't hate me. Maybe just ignore me if you really don't like me, but whatever. Anyway, that's my ADHD and anxiety going there, then trying to fill up space. Anyway, but the problem with having an unseen disability is most people don't actually know what it looks like, and I've often this is a daily occurrence, really. If I'm having these conversations, oh, we didn't, I'll say I've got dyslexia and ADHD and anxiety, and they're like, oh, we didn't think you had an unseen disability. You don't seem like you've got a disability. I was like, well, there lies the problem. You don't know what other people's realities are. You don't know how these conditions affect people. And in the working world, that can be really tough to navigate, especially I'm currently going through an adult diagnosis for ADHD, and it is stressful. I will give you that. It's very stressful. And I'm sure this is not how you wanted this podcast to turn out, but I think it's important because we're all different, and we all have different ways of working, and we all have different passions, and we all are different, and our brains all work differently. And if we're trying to lift each other up, I mean, I personally believe that I lift myself up by lifting up other people. And if I can be candid and showcase who I am unapologetically, and also from a place of that I love myself and positivity, hopefully that will inspire other people to feel that they don't feel alone, especially now.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really positive message. I don't mind it. I studied once with a girl who had dyslexia, and I find it amazing that you managed to actually go through a master's and now a PhD, because I didn't think that the school system was prepared to deal with her. They made her feel a lot like she was less than something. It wasn't an easy diagnosis either to get. And I think
it's expensive as well. It's very expensive.
Yeah, and I don't think all schools are prepared to deal with different types of education either. And then you maybe end up shutting people off from a different path.
Exactly. That's what I meant by when I said that's why G&G is set up in the inclusive way that it has been set up, because of my direct experience of having three unseen disabilities and trying to navigate the world of work or whatever challenge I've had. I don't want anyone to feel like they have to go through that themselves again alone. Or if they're going through it, then they can reach out, whatever it is.
Jess, we always ask our guests to let us know what would be the advice that they would like to give the younger selves, if you can think of any.
Oh, this is such a good question. I've got 3. Is it okay to give you 3 answers?
Yes, perfect. The more the merrier.
Okay, cool. I could give you 10, but I think I'm just boring everyone. Number one, follow your gut. If something doesn't feel right, make sure that you follow your gut. Hindsight is a funny thing, and if you feel like you need to do something, or you're interested in something, or something just you can't explain it, and you're passionate about it, follow your gut. Quite often, it is the right message. Second, you're going to like this one. Take networking seriously. And I know that sounds really, really, really superficial to some, but for career development, yes, you have to be good at your job. 100% you have to be good at your job. But there is a power in knowing people and having informal brand around people in your sphere. And by that, I mean, if you know people who know people, I'm not saying you have to know the president of a company or anything like that, but if you can build rapport with people and build trust, you never know what your next step is going to be. Never burn bridges. That's why networking is important. The third one would be try and read widely and random stuff. You never know when it's going to be useful. I've had random questions about the most recently about how we are taller when we wake up in the morning, because obviously the vertebrae between your back are spread out because you're on a bed. And I'm not a scientist. I had a recent conversation about that, and it was quite insightful. So you never know what weird and random stuff is going to aid you in your next kind of couple of steps. So try and be as informed as you can from as many sources. Obviously not going overboard. Don't overwhelm yourself. And also that's one of the reasons why I created my own newsletter.
I was going to plug it and say that people should read your newsletter as part of that. But yes, please tell us about it.
Over the pandemic period, but I really was very conscious that stuff that I have access to isn't easily digestible for a lot of people. And by that, I mean, I'm probably one of the biggest nerds on your podcast, Isabel. I find joy in reading a journal article, like an academic journal article. I'm a nerd. I'm that nerd, right? Because I've been trained in how to read academic writing. I can speed read through a journal. One of the superpowers of being dyslexic, I can get through it in probably like 10 minutes. But I read a lot of random stuff: tech, culture, diplomacy, innovation, climate science, you name it. I plug it. I have a subscription to something, right? Business leadership. I just kind of was steadily more aware of how some of this stuff is very unaccessible to regular people. So to someone who maybe English isn't necessarily their first language, or if they haven't necessarily have had the skills to read a journal article that might be 50 pages long, it can get quite dense, right? Or maybe they're not even aware of certain fields, like certain things in leadership, for example. And I kind of sat down and I thought, I want to do something that allows people to kind of see a little bit more into the world that I operate in. And I mean, I was going to initially start a blog, and then I thought, no one wants to listen to me. And my two of my very good friends both work at LinkedIn. They were like, oh yeah, there's this LinkedIn option, like this newsletter. I never wanted to commercialize it either. So the big thing for me was that I wanted to do something very, very pro bono. In 3 months, I've hit 9,000 followers, and people want to, obviously they find some value in it. And it looks at interdisciplinary thinking, so especially along the lines of culture, diplomacy, innovation, basically everything that I've done so far, and kind of it's like a baby project of this PhD that I'm undertaking. And he's got 3 parts. The first part is like a grab bag of random stuff. So, for example, in Sweden, they had a record store that was set up for mice. And they had the classic of Destiny's cheese, just random stuff like that. That I find, or the fact that someone in Manchester used a snake as a face covering recently.
Oh my God, that was crazy. Yes.
The hilarious and the not so hilarious. Or the fact that South Korea recently, they finally won their 16-year battle with Kellogg's, and Kellogg's have brought in the spring onion flavored cereal. 16-year battle.
My God.
I will send links. It's very interesting. And then the second, so you can guess the vibe of the first section. The second section is a deep dive into a random area. So most recently, I've done a 4-part series. It was like a month long, if not more, on networking. So looking at what is your why, the rationales around networking, extroverted, introvertedness, online networking, all of these things, which I think obviously I like networking. It has got networking in the name, so it's not an unfamiliar subject to you.
Yes, no, but it's something that everyone needs support with. So, and I really love your tips. They're really actionable tips.
The thing is that I try to do something that you leave feeling like you can implement straight away. Because quite often with these newsletters, it's very high level, or it's very specific, or it's something that's not necessarily relevant to everyone. But if you can do the actionable like nuggets, then quite often it has a lot more value than you may think. So that's that. In the next couple of ones, I'm looking at kind of I think I'm going to switch to learning, because this is something where I'm kind of, because I'm on that process of the PhD and kind of absorbing a lot more stuff, and the process of learning and digitally learning, because obviously with the pandemic, my whole first semester is online, which is quite interesting. Interesting in the sense that I have individual studies, which is fine. But for people who are undergrads or master's students, their whole university experience is going to be online for the first term probably, and kind of looking at that. So this is something that I want to kind of explore for the next couple. And then the last section is an interview. And I've got some amazing people lined up, and I think you're going to be very excited, because one is from Brazil as well, and he's awesome. I'm not saying who it is until it drops, but I'm very sure you're going to be very excited, because he's fantastic.
Bring all the Brazilians to the hood.
Every single Brazilian.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the back of that, I'm excited to announce something else, which, because I don't have enough side hustles already, I'm launching as of today something called the Showcase, which I would love to expand to I like networking community. And it's a showcase focused on using the kind of platform that I've built with the newsletter, and also the kind of other stuff that I do with Growth and Grace, to kind of offer a place to showcase awesome people doing awesome stuff. So if anyone would like to nominate themselves, and Isabel, you're more than welcome to put yourself forward, I'd love to be able to kind of hype you guys more.
That is amazing. That is a really cool initiative. Thank you, Jess. So before you leave us, just let us know what are the best ways to reach you then. Should people follow you on LinkedIn or on Instagram, Growth and Grace, everything?
Yeah, follow me everywhere. Just love me. Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn with the linkedin.com/in/JESS GOSLING. My surname is the same spelling as Ryan Gosling. Can't misspell it. Now I have someone famous who also shares the same surname. On Instagram, you can get me at JK Gosling. The Growth and Grace Collective you can find on LinkedIn as well, with Growth and Grace Collective, and it's the same for Instagram too. And I will send you all the links.
Thank you so much, Jess, for taking some time off of your very, very busy day with all your 12,100 jobs and side gigs to talk to us. And I will speak to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to the I Like Networking podcast. Please remember to share, subscribe, and review the podcast so that more people can find us. All the information discussed on this episode will be on the show notes. See you next time.